Welcome back. We're here with Lora Dunnam Morgan Wermuth, and she would like to share some of her fabulous history with us. So, Lora, take it from the beginning.
The beginning was in Flagstaff, Arizona, on a July evening that my mother tells me was full of lightning and thunder. And I grew up in Flagstaff. I was fortunate to go to the college elementary school, which was a training school for teachers. And I had a wonderful education up through the 6th grade. And then we all, from all the elementary schools, went to junior high and then Flagstaff High School. By that time, the war had started, and many of the good teachers had gone to war. You can see how old I am by saying that I started high school in 43.
Right, you're going to have to mention which war it was.
I skipped a year and graduated in 46. And I had planned to go to college at Flagstaff, but I met some interesting people at summer camp from Tucson, where the university was. So I went home and asked my dad if I could go to the university instead, and he said, sure. So I went to the University of Arizona, which was known as a playground for the Eastern people. We even had a polo team. And I was overwhelmed. There were several thousand GIs, soldiers who had come back, had the GI Bill, were very serious about their education. Here I was, just barely 17, a naive little girl from Flagstaff. The competition in the classrooms was formidable. The dating was excellent. There were lots of guys. But anyway, I stayed there. I took one semester at the University of New Mexico and enjoyed that very much. That campus is lovely. It's built on Pueblo style. Then I came back to Tucson, where my friends were. My parents were both born in Texas and migrated separately to New Mexico. My mother went there where her sisters were teaching. And eventually she finished high school in Morenci, Arizona, where her mother had moved, and so that she could go to school. She had 2 brothers there who were engineers for the mining railroads in Morenci. My mother was an excellent student, and she finished high school in 3 years and was the valedictorian. And then later she became a teacher and used to go from her parents' ranch home to the home of Johnny Jones, who was a big rancher in northern New Mexico. And she lived with the Jones family during the week and taught all the children in the school, several of them Jones children, but others too.
How did she travel back and forth?
Oh, well, she went on horseback. I'm not sure there were any cars. There were just beginning to be cars at that time. And I think she met my dad when he was delivering mail. Each of them was working for $1 a day. She had room and board on top of that. Years later, I met some of the Jones family, probably most of it, but one of them, Francis, said to me, "Your mother brought culture to our neighborhood." My mother had been a really fine student, and she memorized lots of English poetry, and she could recite that poetry. And in fact, when she and her sister Aline would meet, they would start off quoting poetry to each other. I was very impressed. I memorized a bit myself, and I still have lots of books of poetry and read them when I'm looking for a certain kind of inspiration. My dad had tuberculosis. In fact, his mother had died from TB, and it was a very common illness at that time. His mother died when he was 5. When he was about 12, he rode a horse from Fort Worth, Texas, to Hobbs, New Mexico, where his oldest brother, William Dunham, lived. And my dad, Colin Dunnam, stayed at Hobbs for a few years working with his brother. And another brother, Tom, had moved there also. And then Dad moved up to the ranch country where Mother was living, and they met and they married on her 21st birthday on the steps of the ranch house of Tres Lagunas. My dad got a Hutmobile, and he had been in the cavalry, and he had broken down with TB and had a medical discharge. And he had a small pension, very small, I think under $50 at that time, $50 a month. But they had this Hutmobile, and they took a 1-year honeymoon around the western US. Had a wonderful time. Then they went to Flagstaff and liked it very much. The air was pure. You lived at the foot of the mountains. Beautiful pine, the largest pine forest in the world there. So they stayed in Flagstaff, and my dad made a lease with the Forest Service for 99 years. And he built what was called Camp Kit Carson. It was the first motor park on Highway 66. He named it Kit Carson because he loved history in the West and the history of the mountain men. And Kit Carson was one of his heroes. The town next to us was named Williams after Bill Williams, another mountain man. So they would buy you seconds of lumber and eventually built about 25 cabins, I think. When I was 5, my older brother died. He was the only child and only person in Arizona that year to die of meningitis. He had spinal meningitis, and there was no lab in Flagstaff. His death crushed my parents, so they leased the store, and we went to Coolidge, Arizona, to spend the winter. And there, my mother had had another little boy, and there he died. So back to Flagstaff, the minister driving up my dad's car, and my parents in the back seat with this small coffin on their laps. It was a terribly sad time. And my little brother, Mackie, was buried in Flagstaff in the Dunnam plot. These Model Ts and other old cars would come by. They weren't old cars then, they were new. But the kids often were towhead blondes, and they would have bicycles piled on the cars or wash tubs or whatever. And the people would stop and ask my dad if he would take in trade something for gasoline. He always did that, and he always offered them food. Some of them would camp in the National Forest campground across the road. And occasionally my dad would hire somebody to work a few days, usually chopping wood or maybe helping with the plumbing or something around the camp. But it was really a parade. I saw the Grapes of Wrath go west from Flagstaff. They were good people, down on their luck, very proud, not wanting a handout. But my father was a 32nd degree Shriner Mason, and the Masons were very strong in Mexico. And while we were trying to get permission to bring my dad's body home, I had with me a Presbyterian pastor who had been born in the Argentine and was fluent in Spanish. And I kept passing out $20 bills, knowing how things went in Mexico, but nothing happened. And finally I said, well, you know, he was a Shriner, he was a 32nd degree Mason. Oh, he was a Mason. So suddenly all the paperwork was done, and it was okayed, and they put the coffin on a train and from Mazatlan to Nogales. And my dad's best friend, John Bradford, took his pickup truck and went to Nogales to meet the body. So Dad was able to be buried in the Dunnam plot with his boys. Dave, the pastor who was with him, was a tremendous help. But being a Mason made all the difference in the world in Mexico. And my dad didn't join many things, but he was proud of being a Mason. My mother also was a member of the Eastern Star. One time my sister Betty decided to have a treasure hunt. So she took their rings and other jewelry and buried them out in the garden. And that was it. We never could find them. I went hunting with my dad a few times, but I wouldn't have killed anything. I don't think I even took a gun. He hunted a good deal, and both my parents had shot deer, and I'm sorry to say their heads were mounted, one above the door and at the store and another one somewhere else. My mother said later she was really sorry that she had shot it. My dad was a sharpshooter, and he also kept a pistol hanging on the wall. We understood very well that we weren't to touch it. He had also a closet full of guns, rifles, primarily hunting rifles. And one Christmas, he gave Betty and me rifles for Christmas, which seems like a strange gift to a girl, but we enjoyed them. Mine was a short Winchester 22. Hers was longer, and turned out she was a crack shot. I was not so good. After college, my college roommate's father had given her a blue Chevrolet convertible, so we decided to move to Los Angeles. And that's what we did. Tommy and I came from northern Arizona and both found jobs at Westinghouse Electric as secretaries, kind of. And we found a place to live up on the hill above Sunset Boulevard on Sunset Drive, and it was ideal. And we were very busy. We were both blondes, we were both dating, we were just having a ball. And then I had an offer to teach at a private school, Anokia in Sierra Madre. It's no longer there, but it was a wonderful place. And at that time I was dating Charlie Morgan, who was from Arizona, but I had not met him before he came to Los Angeles. Anyway, we had a great year at Anokia, and then Charlie and I decided to get married and went to Albuquerque. My mother rather insisted that we be married in Albuquerque. So we were, and he worked there for a year with a paint company, and then we moved back to Los Angeles, where there were more jobs for him. Excuse me. We bought a home in West Covina, and Charlie had plans to make lots of money and do things professionally. And he told my best friend that he had no plans to be married or have a family. So when he asked me to marry him, I told him no, I wouldn't, because I intended to have several children. But he wanted me enough to agree to have children, so we did. And our first child was born at Huntington Hospital in Pasadena. Born laughing, I must say, and has been laughing ever since. And my second child was a little girl, Susan Lynn, born in Covina. And the third one was Jim, also born in Covina. That was wonderful to be close to home and have the same nurses I'd had before. And then we had Chuck and eventually Russ. I had to plead to have Russ because he thought 4 was all he could educate. But it turned out Russ was a bonus and a wonderful, good-natured, sweet kid. As they grew up, I had a lot of fun with them. Took them on trips, took them to visit their grandparents. I did some substitute teaching and tried to write short stories, which were rejected. Finally, we bought a home in Palos Verdes, which was ideal for raising a family. It was a quarter acre or a little more, and it had a horse lot. Susan wanted a horse, but her dad said he couldn't afford a horse. But she saw an ad in the paper for a donkey, and she had $38 in the bank, and that was enough to buy the donkey. So she went down, I dropped her off where the donkey was, and she led it back up Palos Verdes Drive East, which was very curvy. So we had Danny the donkey with us for some years. And then I thought all children should have a dog. And I saw an ad for puppies in Brentwood. They were a mixture. The mother was a Great Pyrenees and the father a Golden Retriever. And so we took the kids and went to Brentwood and paid $35 for this beautiful puppy. And we named him Ombre. Interestingly enough, John wanted to name him, who was it in Greek literature with the bad heel?
Achilles.
Achilles.
Yeah.
You know, so I said, you can't say Achilles heel. You know? So we named him Ombre, which is Spanish, of course, for man. And he was a wonderful animal, sweet, good-natured. We had another little dog, and Ombre would stand back while Lola ate her dinner, and then he would eat his. He used to run around the neighborhood and couldn't keep him fenced in. And one morning I answered the doorbell, and there was a woman standing there. She looked marvelous. She was a buyer for bullocks, and she was very chic. And she said, "Are you the owners of Ombre?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "We love him, but he just jumped through our louvered dining room window to get at our dog in heat. So would you please keep Ombre home?" Well, that was the first of many of his escapades. My grandparents had come from the South. They were all Southerners, losers in the Civil War. My own grandmother had been raised on a plantation with slaves. All of that was lost, and they all had moved to Texas. But my Aunt Lora, for whom I was named, said that my grandmother never complained or fussed about anything. They became dirt farmers in Texas. It was a very tough life.
Good. Tell us a little bit about your second marriage.
My second marriage, I had not wanted a divorce, but we'd become two. It was almost essential, a parting of the ways. And I rented a little apartment down in Torrance. And I had known a family retired Army colonel living up in PV, and a friend of his was coming to visit. So I offered to pick the friend up, and actually my niece Barbara was staying with me, and she met the friend, and his name was Tony Wermuth. He was another retired colonel, and Barbara brought him to my apartment, and I came home from Torrance Hospital where I was working, came home for lunch and met Tony. And I remember I had a snazzy pink suit. I'd forgotten to make it, but it was really nice. And I was wearing red high heels. And I kicked them off, sat talking to Tony, and he picked up my foot and kissed it. And I thought, what? But he charmed me. He was the smartest individual I'd ever met. And I tend to enjoy bright people. especially people who've accomplished things. He was from a poor family in Philadelphia, never a chance to get a senatorial appointment to the academies. And he was raised Catholic, and the priest didn't want him to go. They said, our boys lose their faith if they go to the academies. But Tony, on the basis of test scores, was admitted to West Point. And there he was very active in the chorale, and he edited the journal, I've forgotten now what it was called, and they did a play every year, and he was involved in that. And I met many of his classmates. It was kind of funny. After we married, we moved to Florida, and there would be a series of West Pointers coming to check out Tony's new wife. Thank goodness one of them said to Tony, well, you lucked out twice, old man. So I felt like I passed their standards. But he was a joy to me. He was short and stocky, and my mother teased me, saying that's not the kind of man you ever looked at or dated. I did like him tall and slender, but talking with him was just inspiring. And we had a lovely big house beside the lake in Mount Dora, and we had desks facing each other. And he had been back to teach at West Point, but at the time he retired, he was the chief speechwriter for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is a very distinguished position. But we could talk about everything. He was the only one I knew who had read more books than I had. And he was so kind and gentle and nice and smart that I just relished his company. He became ill. Finally, he had dementia. And in 1992, he died. But I still miss him. He's one of those people who changes the course of your life. I was mentioning Tony's grandchildren, and I must tell you about Liz. The family had been in California and were moving to Ohio. The mother was divorced for the second or third time. And then from Ohio, they were coming to Florida because she got kicked out of every place where they were. And she said to me in Ohio, well, we're coming there, but Liz is going to flunk first grade. And I said, no, Liz won't flunk first grade. So when they came, I got her a tutor, a mature woman, a retired teacher, and she helped Liz, and Liz became top of the class, first grade, and after that was always number one in school, and eventually went to Miami University of Ohio. Liz and I became fast friends, and she still comes to visit me. We are so at ease with each other. It's almost as if I were her mother or an older sister. She is a remarkable girl, and she's very grateful for the help I gave her. And I never thought anything about it. It's just you do what you need to do. One afternoon, she had come to me in our home in Florida, and she said, Grandma, we have not eaten today. So, of course, I fed the 3 children right there. But she went on to become a registered nurse and a nurse practitioner, married a doctor who went to Harvard and to Harvard Medical School. She's done nursing, she's done teaching nursing, and she runs a salon where she helps women look beautiful and not their ages. She's a girl of many talents, but she is the most grateful person I've ever met. She still thanks me for looking after them. And one time she wrote me the cutest letter when she was maybe 14. And she said, "Grandma, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for teaching me how to set the table. I want to thank you for teaching me about Dove soap." And all such things. And she remains grateful to this day. My own granddaughter, Sarah, says, "You saved her life." I did not save her life. She is a survivor. She would have made it whatever happened, but I did help her along the way. And she's still one of my favorite people in the whole world. Her sister Janice was a very gifted child. They're all artistically gifted. And Janice worked for a while with the scientific community, but then quit and does crafts and arts, which is what she prefers. Liz gave me a grand 90th birthday, and she comes every year for my birthday, and the last one was the 93rd. We are on Skype together once in a while, and yesterday I got a book to Grandma Lora Morgan Wermuth. The book is entitled The Divider, and it's about my most unfavorite president. And I saw the review for it in the Los Angeles Times yesterday. So I picked it up and started reading, and I read a third of the book before I ever put it down again. Anyway, it's sweet that she remembers me, and she does in various ways. And she's taking care of her own daughter, who's 10 and not in great health, and her husband, who's a busy doctor, and his father was recently hospitalized and we think had a pace setter installed. And Liz is kind of looking after the whole tribe at this point.
Wow.
And she's one of the bright lights in my life. I feel as if she's my own child in many ways.
Great. Well, thank you, Lora. I think that'll be it for today.
Okay, I wanted to tell you one more thing.
Okay, give us one more story.
My grandfather was named Preston Brooks Bryan, and he was born in Apalachicola, Florida. And I've looked up the name Preston Brooks. I had heard this in folklore through the family. This was when the North and South were so estranged. And a senator named Preston Brooks used his cane to beat terribly another senator who was an abolitionist. And my grandfather's parents were so enthralled with the senator with the cane that they named my grandfather Preston Brooks. So now we have the names Preston and Brooks throughout our family from this dreadful man who was a Southerner, and they were so proud of it. Grandpa was a wonderful, like an Irish grandpa. He smoked a pipe, twinkled, told jokes all the time. We all loved him to pieces. That was Preston Brooks. My grandmother was Julia Moss, and her father had been with the Texas Rangers. So you can see they were all Southerners and poor because they had lost the war. They were all educated, however, nobody illiterate among the families. Anyway, it was quite a family to be born into, and I've enjoyed it. Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. I heard you had an exchange student.
Oh, we had the greatest exchange student. One day I was at Santa Barbara with my mother. She had had a heart attack at 75, and I was up there. She did very well, by the way. And the phone rang, and it was my son, Jim. And he said, can we take an exchange student? And I said, I'll think about it. He said, I have to know right now. So I said, well, if it's a boy, okay. And he had figured out, because he wanted to go to Germany the following year, that we needed to take a student from Germany. So we did, and the day he came, it was evening, it was dark. We met him at the airport and came to the house in Palos Verdes, and I was fixing him something to eat, and I heard a splash, and Thomas had jumped into the pool, swimming pool in the backyard. And later I said to him, we never swim alone. There's always one person out here with us. But he just laughed. It was loads of fun. He was a very bright fellow, a good student, and he loved to dance. And my son Jim was a member of Cotillion. So they got to go to dances in the big hotels in Los Angeles and then come back to the different homes and have parties. In fact, one time the police were called and they came over and said that somebody had complained about noise, but they said this is the nicest group of boys and girls we've seen anywhere on the peninsula. Thomas was a wonderful fellow, and we're still in touch. I have visited him 2 or 3 times in Germany, and he treats me like a queen. He takes me all over. We went to the North Sea, the Baltic Sea. He got a retriever, like our golden retriever, and I think he even named it Ombre. But Thomas is a very special person in our lives. Great.
Did you follow Queen Elizabeth II?
Oh, yes. When she was born, it made all the papers, of course. And I was born a few years later, 4 actually. And then she had a younger sister named Margaret, and I had an older sister, Betty. And the papers were always full of news about the young English princesses. So we followed them with great interest. Also, interestingly enough, in Canada, there were born a set of quintuplets, the Dion quintuplets, and we followed their lives with interest too. I've admired her all my life. I think she was a very pretty woman, intelligent, very kind, very steady. It's a difficult job when you can't mention politics and you have to deal with politicians from either side of the aisle. I think she was remarkable, probably one of the best sovereigns England has ever had, or the United Kingdom, I should say, including Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland. I grieved her. I was surprised when my stepson Tony emailed me that he was missing the Queen, because I'm missing her too. I used to follow her on my iPad, and I was interested in what she was doing and how she treated her family and how she carried on her duties. I think she was quite remarkable. Another one of those people who change your life.